Good afternoon, folks. Hey, sorry for that that delay. We're just working through some technical stuff, as I'm sure we've all experienced over the past year or so. But glad to see we still got about 130 people here in the audience. So thanks for waiting. I'm Zach Moss. I'm the Saber Streams coordinator with the Isaac Walton League of America. And we work with a lot of water quality issues and volunteer water quality monitoring around the country. And I am based out of Iowa, and today we've got Dr. Chris Jones from University of Iowa and Eric Fuchs with the Missouri Rural Water Association. And we're just gonna listen to these guys give some great information about nitrate pollution. And we're gonna have Chris present first, then Eric will follow up, and we'll have some time for question and answer at the end. And throughout the webinar, I'll be in the background just moderating questions. You should have a questions panel on the side of your screen. You can type things in there and I can see those and respond to those accordingly. If I'm not able to answer it, we can read it out loud at the Q&A session at the end. This webinar is going to be recorded and we'll send out a video to a link to the video when we're all finished up here. And the video is posted on YouTube, so just stay tuned for that if you're interested in getting the video. And without further ado, I'm going to pass this off to Dr. Chris Jones with the University of Iowa IIHR Hydroscience and Engineering Lab. So go ahead and get started, and Eric and I are going to turn off our cameras and mute and pop back in when it's our time.
Okay, thanks, Zach. Yes, my name's Chris Jones. I work at Hydroscience and Engineering at the University of Iowa, which is in this building here on the banks of the Iowa River. And I've got a real Iowa-centric presentation here today, and I'm just going to talk about some recent stream nitrate data and how that relates to the Gulf of Mexico and some other things. And so I will say I have a website. I try to keep pretty active. And I post my slides, although sometimes it takes me a few days to get them up there. And so if you want my slides, they'll be up there eventually. I also write blog posts, and I invite you to take a look at those. And I haven't posted anything for a couple months, but I think there's some things in there that would be interesting to people in the context of water quality and agriculture in the state of Iowa. And so I manage the university's water quality sensor network. These are two of our field staff people out in a stream here in Iowa, doing some maintenance on the sensors. And so these are where the sensors are deployed. There's about 70 sites around Iowa. The blue sites are the IIHR sites, or the university sites. They're funded mainly through the Iowa Nutrient Research Center, but also from some other sources, including the Carver Trust and some others. Then we also harvest data from the USGS sites, which are shown in green, and then there's about 10 sites funded through the Iowa Watershed Approach Project, which is money from the Housing and Urban Development. At all the sites, we're measuring nitrate. At about 20 to 25 sites, we're measuring those other parameters I have shown there. This was a site on the Wapsipinicon River, just to show you what it looks like. Sensors go down through those PVC pipes into the moving water, and up on the stream bank we have a dry box with the solar panel and a deep cycle battery, a modem, and a data logger, and we send the data back to the university in 15-minute packets. And so this is an enormous amount of data, as you might imagine, every 15 minutes from 70 sites. And so here's another look at the Krepp wetland near Orchard, Iowa. This is the inlet and outlet of the wetland, where we measure the wetland's capacity to sequester nitrogen. This is the second largest Krepp wetland in Iowa. We have about 100 of these constructed wetlands around the state. Here's the first sensor site. This was in the Raccoon River at Van Meter, Iowa. This one was deployed back in 2006, and if I remember right, the Isaac Walton League chapter in Des Moines provided a little bit of money for this to get deployed. And so this was when I worked at the Des Moines Waterworks, and so that one is still there. USGS has taken it over though. So all the data comes into our website. We call it the Iowa Water Quality Information System. If you haven't taken a look at this, I really encourage you to do so. There's a lot of excellent information you can get from the website. Right now, we don't have, all the sensors out there. Just a small subset of the sensors are deployed because we do retrieve a lot of them in the winter, but they really start going out about March 1st. And so you'll see the map get populated here in the next few weeks. And so there's an excellent land use tool on the website. You can click on any spot in Iowa. It'll give you it will delineate the upstream area and give you the land cover in that watershed. And so, for example, this is the Iowa River upstream of Iowa City, and you can see about 38% corn, 29% soybeans, and so on. So it's a really nice tool. Again, an enormous amount of data is generated here, and I work closely with Keith Schilling, who's a state geologist, and we also work with other faculty and graduate students to try to generate original research. And these are some of the topics that we've published on over the last 5 or 6 years. So we all know that this nitrate has consequences leaving the state of Iowa, and we have the dead zone down in the Gulf of Mexico there in the lower right. We have a similar eutrophication problem in Lake Erie from farm runoff from western Ohio and eastern Indiana, and then we have drinking water issues associated with this problem. Des Moines, I think everybody knows, largest nitrate removal facility in the world to remove nitrate from the Des Moines and Raccoon River to provide safe drinking water to the Des Moines area. And then up there in Toledo, Ohio, a few years ago, we had a real emergency. The city and surrounding area couldn't consume the treated drinking water because of toxins from the algae that are, spread or caused to bloom by the nutrients, including nitrogen. And so this is some of the Des Moines River water last summer in that plastic vessel there. I blocked out some names on the label there, and so we have these terrible algae blooms here too. We don't need to go down to the Gulf or to Lake Erie. We see that in our streams here that are this algae is driven by the excess nitrogen and phosphorus that are in our streams. And so I'll present a little data here. This is the watershed data that I have that you're going to see here momentarily, and what we have about 15 watersheds there. The purple line divides the state into the area draining to the Missouri and the area draining to the Mississippi. And so I use the data from the sensors and I aggregate it with data from Iowa DNR, from Iowa DNR's ambient monitoring network to do some load estimations for each of the watersheds, and then for these areas draining to the east and draining to the west. And so when we look at 2020, the land draining to the upper Mississippi, you can see up there it's 69% of Iowa. The nitrate load leaving that part of Iowa in 2020 was 435 million pounds. And so that was also 69% of the statewide load. You can see the loss per acre there averages 17.5 pounds, and the loss per crop acre, 27 pounds. And the amount of runoff that we have from that area in 2020 was 13 inches. Then land draining to the Missouri, which is 31% of Iowa, you can see the nitrate load from that area is 191 million pounds in 2020. The loss per crop acre over there is a little less, 22.7. The water yield 10 inches, so it was drier in western Iowa than it was in eastern Iowa. And so when we look at this individual watershed data here, the black number is the loss in pounds per total acres. The red number is the loss per crop acre, and the blue is the runoff. And so we can see, these watersheds are different. The loss of nitrogen does vary around the state. Northeast Iowa is quite remarkable here the last few years in how much nitrogen we're losing from those watersheds. And you can see the Yellow River there, the loss there, 78 pounds per crop acre. That's, really pretty astonishing. And so, what we have up there is we have thin topsoils, maybe 12 inches of topsoil, and we have the karstic bedrock very close to the surface, very porous, and the karst basically acts like tile. And so the nitrogen and water both are lost very quickly from the topsoil to the karst bedrock, which then transfers it very rapidly to the stream network. And so we really see some very large losses of nutrients in that part of Iowa. And also Northwest Iowa, especially Floyd River, they're 35.8 pounds per crop acre. We have a real intense livestock production system up there, and we know that many of these watersheds in Iowa, where we have the densely populated livestock, is where we have our largest N loss. And so I'm going to skip that one here. And so when we look at Iowa data relative to the Gulf of Mexico and the Missouri River and the upper Mississippi River, how do we look? And so this is a period 1999 to 2016 for areas of Iowa draining to the Missouri. And so when we look at that area, it's 3.3% of the entire Missouri River watershed, right? So the Missouri watershed's huge, goes clear to the Continental Divide. We have 3.3% of the land. We contribute 12% of the water, but we contribute 55% of the nitrate to the Missouri River. And so some years the Missouri River would really have almost no nitrate were it not from the contribution from Iowa. The upper Mississippi River, you can see there we have 21% of the land. We contribute 21% of the water, but 45% of the nitrate. And then down at the Gulf of Mexico, we have 4.5% of the land. We contribute about 6% of the water and 29% of the nitrate. And so we here in Iowa are really a disproportionately large contributor to the nitrate problem in the Mississippi Basin. And so how much nitrogen leaves Iowa? Well, we tend to look at this as the 5-year running annual average to kind of account for differences in weather that occur from year to year. So we know that weather can change a lot from one year to the next, but the 5-year running annual average, we're losing about 425,000 tons per year from the state. And so that metric, the running annual average, is about doubled since 2003. And so that's the line in red. The line in blue is the Iowa areas draining to the Mississippi. That's increased about 72%. And then the green line, the Iowa areas draining to the Missouri, has increased 191% since 2003. And so things seem to be changing more rapidly in western Iowa than they are in eastern Iowa. And that's probably because we've had more conversion of pasture to row crop in western Iowa. And the tile has come later out there. And so, a big question, we have is related to this map. And so, we know that We've had a real intensification of livestock production in Iowa. Our number of hogs have gone from about 14 million to about 25 million today. And so when I look at the total numbers of livestock and I accumulate and I convert that to a human equivalent of manure nutrients, this is the effective population that's living in each of our watersheds in Iowa. And so we can see upstream of Des Moines, we essentially have the city of Chicago, Tokyo, Paris, and then Alabama and Oklahoma, all draining down the Des Moines and Raccoon River. And that's when we convert these livestock populations to human equivalents. And so can we achieve the water quality objectives that we want, with this intensity of livestock production? And that's a real question for the state moving forward, especially as we see the ethanol industry is probably, beginning a decline here. What's going to fill the vacuum? And it very likely is going to be livestock. And so how are we going to deal with this here in Iowa to achieve the water quality objectives that we have? And so I think that's my last slide, and I'll hand it back to Zach.
All right, thanks, Chris. Eric, I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter so you can get your screen ready to share.
Okay.
All right, well, he's getting that.
How we looking?
That looks good. So this is Eric Fuchs with the Missouri Rural Water Association. Eric's a source water specialist with them, and he has a background in agriculture with an emphasis on soils. And he's going to talk a little bit about the challenges that nitrate pollution poses towards his work in drinking water, as well as some of the threats that nitrate pollution can present to both consumers economically and producers economically in the future. So go ahead, Eric, it's all you.
Well, I appreciate it, Zach. And I tell you what, after seeing those numbers with Chris, it blows me away. And I apologize that we've got a couple slides that are the same here, but it shows you kind of the emphasis we're putting on that. And thanks for having me here. I have to talk about my first slide here on the hidden cost of nitrates. I kind of put that in there as a joke because, as you see with what Chris put and what I'll talk about, these really aren't hidden. I mean, there's a lot of monitoring that goes on, but it's known what's happening with the nitrates and what's happening in my industry. So I'll go through and try to show little things where I see that maybe things are going to go in the future with this. So just a little bit about my path, soil health, and how I all tie together. So as he said, I'm a source water technician. Each state has got a rural water association with a source water technician, and that's a fancy name for the guy who protects the drinking water before it becomes drinking water. So, as you guys have heard a lot, in regards to drinking water, it's a lot cheaper to keep the water clean to begin with than have to try to pay to clean it up afterwards, and it just makes everything better. I actually got my own livestock operation. I live in southeast Missouri. A lot of what I'm going to talk about does deal a little bit with southeast or with Missouri, but I can associate most of it with everything across the United States. But we raise some cattle and some sheep and just a small operation, but I've been around cattle, been around crops, been around all that all my life. So, and then like you said, I've got a soils background. Got a degree from the University of Missouri, so I don't know if that's good or bad talking to you, some of the Iowa folks, but was really taught kind of conventionally, and this all kind of formed my path to go into what I'm talking about today. That's just the little pictures, and like I said, I was conventionally trained. It was really funny when I got into Missouri Rural Water Association. One of the first meetings I had at Lenexa on the EPA, and this kind of formed my whole background about 6 or 7 years ago. We were talking about pollution and about point and non-point nitrates, phosphorus, where it was come from. And I remember after being on this job about 6 months, I said, well, I can tell you where it's coming from. It's coming from ag grounds. And it was almost like I said something that was forbidden. It's like, oh no, we can't talk about that. So I assure you, a lot of things I'm talking about The primacy agency knows about it, EPA knows about it, Chris's research definitely shows about it, and most of the ag groups know about it and know that there's a problem out here as well. So this is not a new thing. Just a few pictures from my own operation, and like I said, we do raise sheep and cows, and we do not do any row crop right now. I talked a little bit about source water. You know, like I said, each state has got that. I would ask you guys, if you wanted to reach out to your rural water associations if you want to know more about some of this stuff, or reach out to me as well after we get done here. So just wanted to talk about my introduction and how these ties together. So I was fortunate enough to take what I knew with rural water and get soil health training. And many of you may have heard of Doug Peterson and Ray Archuleta and Gabe Brown, Dave Brandt are kind of the gurus of soil health. I was able to go some training on Dave Brandt's place, and actually here with Dave Brandt this weekend on some of the stuff they're doing. If you guys have ever heard the name Gabe Brown, who's big in soil health, he's actually testifying in Congress right now on some of the stuff that's going on. But what this did, it really kind of started forming my path. I had the livestock background, I got the soil health principles, and then I had the drinking water stuff, and I started really tying all this stuff together. So just a real brief on most people around the United States, and especially the Midwest, they get their drinking water from surface water areas. Missouri in particular, it mainly comes from the Missouri and the Mississippi River. That's where the majority of people around the country do get their water from, but especially as you're going through the Midwest. So this is just a map of the watersheds of the Mississippi and Missouri River. And I think when you look at what Chris has talked about, and you look at the Corn Belt, you look at what most of the row crop is grown, you look at what's happened here, you kind of start seeing the correlation. So like I said, in Missouri, over 50% of the population gets its water from either the Missouri or the Mississippi River. You know, it's interesting when you look at different states, you know, we have a problem all over the United States, but there's certain places like New York City that actually has pristine drinking water. And why is that? It's because they control their entire source water watershed. So what happens in the watershed, what happens in the source water is really what sets the scene for drinking water across the country. So this is just, now a lot of people do get their drinking water from groundwater. We're seeing, when it talk about nitrates, we're seeing issues both in surface water and groundwater. Probably the only difference is groundwater is much, much harder to clean up and change. Surface water, you can change it pretty relatively quick with rivers and lakes, but when you start having nitrates in groundwater, you're talking a pretty serious problem. One reason, let's see. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, we also work in the wastewater side. So it's like, why would I want to talk about nitrates and wastewater? And this is where a big part of my presentation is going to go, is to talk a little bit about regulations and a little bit about how regulating some places are compared to others. So again, every little town's got some kind of wastewater, whether it be a lagoon or a plant, and every big city does. So just, you know, this is, nitrogen and phosphorus are very heavily regulated when it comes into the wastewater side. This technology that in wastewater has been around thousands of years. It is not new type technology. Something else I wanted to cover just a little bit is that the emphasis now that is getting on clean water and getting on nitrates. Like I said, a lot of the ag groups know what's happened. You know, in the past Farm Bill, 10% was actually set aside for source water protection. So that means 10% of all states have to, or I'm sorry, all states have to use 10% of their money in the Farm Bill just for source water protection. So it is getting more and more attention, and unfortunately it's because of like research Chris has done. I guess that's a good thing, but I mean, unfortunately of what's coming out of Iowa and a lot of these other states, we're starting to see more and more emphasis put on farm bills and source water protection. So I just throw this on there because there is, as Chris and I were talking, Zach and I were talking when this started, there doesn't have to be an either or when it comes to water quality, nutrient management, and crops. We see a lot of that pit against each other. It's like, well, we can't have a clean environment and have all the crops in the land we have. That is absolutely not true. There's a lot of people that are doing a lot of good things to alleviate the problems when it comes to nitrates and drinking water. just a picture I like to say, you know, when I popped this up, Zach said, wow, that looks like Iowa. Well, that's actually in Missouri. And I would ask all of you guys when you drive around to look at the crop ground, look at what's coming off. And I like to say every single thing that comes off these crop grounds becomes my drinking water one time or another. So really take a look at it and know and see what you see as you're driving around the state, because as I started getting in that mindset of that's somebody's drinking water, it really changed the way I saw things. So this little slide just talks about the difference between what it used to be compared to what now. And I won't get into point and non-point too much, but it's just that point source. I can look at it and say that's where that pollution is coming from. Non-point has a much broader index and says, okay, it may be over a whole field or a whole area. So in 1970, 85% of what we have was what's called point source, 15% non-point. That is absolutely flipped around. And when we talk about nitrates, nitrates are not something that I can see in water. I always say there's a big disconnect between clean water and clean drinking water. I can have water that looks very clean, but it can be way over the limit on nitrates. You know, back in 1970, we saw things like this. We saw burning rivers. We saw stuff that we knew we had to handle right off. And that's what we did handle. And EPA did a wonderful job of cleaning those type of things up. But we're actually in a time right now where the non-point is causing a tremendous amount of problems that we can't seem to get our hands around. So you saw the slide I showed before with the drainage of the Mississippi and the Missouri rivers. And then you see the one on the other side, and that's nitrates. Now, it's a little hard slide to see, but you can see, you know, the Gulf, like he said, but not only is the Gulf a big thing, we have all these little drinking water reservoirs, or we have the Des Moines River and the Raccoon River that all these people are trying to rely on for their drinking water. And you can see, actually, this is the Corn Belt, is what it is. There's no secret of where this is coming from and what type of pollution it's coming from. So this is a repeat a little bit from Chris, but this dead zone gets a lot of attention, and this is a big deal. This happens every year. This is very much preventable. It does not have to be what it is, but this is nitrates and phosphorus that are causing this. And I'll try to get a little bit more of my opinion and where I think it's coming from, what's happened. So this is what we see a lot of. We see the rural blame the urban blame the rural. Whose fault is it? Where's it coming from? How do we fix this? And this is something that I get into a lot. And so we all know it's the cities, right? All the stormwater coming off this, all the wastewater coming off this. And what I have found through being in this job is these are very, very highly regulated. And I'm not saying there can't be some improvements, but any city over 10,000 in Missouri has stormwater permits. It's very heavily regulated. All the wastewater is regulated. So for the most part, while there's some infrastructure challenges, the cities do a pretty good job of treating their water and their wastewater. This is a map of showing the groundwater depletion around the United States. And again, take a look at that. We can see the Ogallala Aquifer, a little bit down in the alluvium and down in Arkansas, but that is not used for drinking water. That is used for agriculture. So a lot of the same places you see problems with nitrates and groundwater, you see very, very heavy irrigation levels. That changes the whole water cycle and how nitrates are entered into the drinking water. So this is what I kind of, the whole gist of my presentation. I want to talk about, you know, what's the wrong target? Who do we need? I don't say blame, but let's pick the right target so we can actually fix this problem instead of trying to go a different direction with it. So this is a repeat of Chris's Toledo, Ohio water treatment. That was an algae bloom, as he said. There was 500,000 people that had a do not use order, not a boil order, or not a do not use. And in the logistics of the water world, you can't imagine how hard it is to try. You can't bring drinking water to 500,000 people. This was a huge deal and really reverberated across both the drinking water community and the ag community. And just another picture from space, and this is not a new thing. It happens a lot every year. It just happened to hit the intake on this one. So, but while this was one that was in the news and had a lot of people, there are a lot of communities around Missouri, around Iowa, around in the Corn Belt that have similar type issues all the time. And I'll talk one a little bit closer to home, to my home here in a little bit. He talked about Des Moines, same thing. This is a huge deal, $7,000 per day cost for drinking water treatment. 10 milligrams per liter is the limit, 24, 17, and these are on moving rivers. Rivers aren't known just to have nitrates in them. And I won't get into the lawsuit, but this was a big deal when you've got 500,000 people, I believe is what Des Moines gives water to, and they're affected by a quite smaller amount of people that are farming in the watershed. So this was something that really started giving my world a lot of attention. Now I ask this when I do this live, I always ask the question, what's the difference between these two pictures, the top and the bottom? And it's really interesting to hear what you get. And the difference between these, the top is coming off a tiled field, of agriculture field, and the bottom is coming out of a wastewater treatment plant. So the biggest thing, the difference between these, is the bottom one is very, very highly regulated. The top one is not. But what's the difference? One, both are conduit for nitrates, phosphorus, depending on what it's doing. But for the most part, in regards to nitrogen and phosphorus, the bottom one's probably quite a bit cleaner. But the biggest thing is the bottom one's very heavily regulated. This was kind of the gist of the Des Moines water lawsuit. They wanted to regulate the top, and that got a lot of people stirred up in the ag world. So what I see so far is just is band-aid fixes. We got nutrient reduction strategies. We've got all these good talk, and nothing in my world of the water treatment world, nothing is changing. In fact, my problems are getting worse. The only thing that keeps it as good as it is because the technology to clean up water is very, very good. So we can take water that has lots of nitrates, phosphorus, sediments, things like that, and make it clean and drinkable. But it's not the cheapest way. The best way is to keep it clean in the first place. So I give these little things to really kind of try to drive this home of how I tie in. While we always hear drinking water and nitrates in drinking water is a problem, I want to show you where I think other things are going. So I give this little example of Brookfield, Missouri, a little less than 5,000 people. It's got 1,980 connections to the water and wastewater, but they just had to build a $12 million wastewater plant because they were out of compliance with EPA. You can read 2,682 per resident, but here's what's interesting. Out of that wastewater plant, when they were out of compliance, they discharged 326 pounds of ammonia into the environment. So I want to make a little comparison here. Now, these numbers can vary based off soil types, based off where you stayed, based off whether you split applications in your nitrogen, but I'm just going to use an average here. 200 pounds actual nitrogen on a 1 acre cornfield. If you get 30 to 50% efficiency, this is how much is lost to environment, 90 million acres of corn in the US. So 1 acre of corn, or I should say 3 or 4 acres of corn, is releasing as much into the environment, conventionally raised corn, as that entire wastewater plant that cost $12 million for those people in that town. So when I look at that, I'm like, something's not quite right here. We need to work on what we can in the areas right. Rural Missouri and rural all over the Corn Belt, same thing. Just another example here. Very, very small town, $1 million to upgrade, and they discharge 11 pounds of ammonia per year, and they're out of compliance with EPA. So what's happening is they're just keep twisting the screws tighter and tighter and tighter on these and putting the cost off people that have nothing to do with agriculture directly. And my point is, this is not the correct target. It is not coming from wastewater plants. It's not coming from these places, but yet the consumer is being made to clean it up. And what it does at these little towns, it puts the last nail in the coffin in some of these little towns. They can't afford these type of upgrades. And we see this is just examples they use in Missouri, and I got a few other examples around the country. My counterpart, the town in Montana, nitrates in their drinking water. It's going to cost it's 450 people, $5 million to have a new plant. Right now, they're taking bottled water to these folks. Clark County, Missouri, which is up on the Iowa border up in Cahokia, Missouri. They've got a well that went out of compliance on nitrates. First one we've had in groundwater in Missouri. About $1.2 million to drill a new well, about $2 million to have a new water plant. You could probably put some covers and different things, change the land management of a couple thousand acres around the wellhead, and you can change that. So you can kind of see the difference in monies and how much it is to try to treat this instead of doing it right in the first place. This is just one. This is actually for my counterpart in Wisconsin. This is kind of hard to see, but I went to the one with the red arrow. 387 people. They had to drill a new well because it was contaminated with nitrates. Almost $1 million to do that, so it's $2,455 per person. So my point again, who's paying for these costs that Chris sees in his research? It is the consumer that actually is paying for that. This is another, this is the last one, but I've got a little one closer to home. It's Maryville, Missouri. This is up on the Iowa border. It's Lake Mazingo. 30,000 people received their drinking water from this lake. The whole Nottoway County and surrounding areas. They had a nitrate problem, algae outbreak, came real close to get the do not use order. They have no backup water supply. Now this has been a success story because a lot of agencies come in. I'm going to talk as I'm showing this video, but this is in the Mazingo watershed up there. A lot of agencies come in to help fix these problems. Our DNR, our Soil and Water, NRCS, and they're putting money at this. But look what I see in the watershed here. This is just easily fixed. This is the type of things that are happening in this watershed. All the nitrogen and phosphorus coming off these fields are going right in that watershed. The estimates to build a brand new water plant here were about $30 million. For $4 million, we could put some kind of BMP on every single acre of that watershed. So the difference in pricing is different. Just one more picture from Maryville. We don't have short fence posts in Missouri. That's actually 2 fence there. The one on the left is the new fence. One on the right, fence post short, is the old fence. That's how much sediment has moved down in that area. And this is just basic good soil health principles to keep this from happening. So my point is, I'm not trying to give you a soil health talk. My point is saying that there's easy solutions out there to fix this that are not near as expensive trying to do it the other way. Just another video as I see, every time you see stuff like this, you think how much nitrogen is coming off that field, how much it could be kept from having that to happen. So this is after about an 8-inch rainfall up in North Missouri, very similar soil types to Iowa. This is the very same type area, just not too far over, that had terraces, no-till, and cover crops. You know, my favorite saying is, I do not care what you do on your land, but as soon as it leaves that land, then it becomes my problem. But there are solutions out here. I'm not going to belabor this too much, but just another video after a big rainfall in that area. And you see this quite a lot. This is probably more of the norm than the exception, but look at this. It's just unreal what we see come off those fields. So this is just talking a little bit more about Maryville. We do have solutions to work together. This is a little brochure we put up of all the different areas working together, the different groups working together. These are not hard fixes. There's technology out there to already do it. A couple more pictures. This was the guy that started cover crops this one year, and he took these after a little rainfall event. Now look at that. Drinking water on the right or drinking water on the left. That's dollars right there. That's treatment cost right there. Just some more pictures that really show the benefits of this right off. Just another little picture I like to put up of the strips there. You know, putting something there that ties up that nitrates, leaves it on the field where it's not getting in the water. Catch and release nutrients like we talked about. Another picture that just speaks volumes. Keep the water on the field, keep the nitrogen on the field, keep the phosphorus on the field. That's all we ask for in my world. So, you know, the silver bullet, I always hate to say something is out there that will fix all problems, but, you know, after I got involved with water quality, soil health, and all, there really is. If we change our way of, our way of farming, we help water quality. I think we really help with floods and droughts, help overall health. We've got carbon in the soil. It is actually what I would see as silver bullet. So when I see the future of farming is just doing things different. that are not hard, but it's if I could convince every single producer that what happens on his field or what comes off this field does affect every one of us one way or the other, whether it's down in the Gulf, whether it's somebody's drinking water, it does affect everybody in a different way. So I always like to put on what the future brings here. We are definitely seeing more regulations in our world. And I also, with more regulations means more money. And with more money, that cost has to be put off on the consumer, put off somewhere. And there's a lot of people saying, why are we having to pay for this if we're not the one causing the problems? The consumers have become much, much more involved in air quality and what's going on. They want to know where their food comes from. They want to know what's in their water. We see that. Costly upgrades, and we talked about litigation. The Des Moines Waterworks lawsuit was a big deal. And the thing about it, it had merit. It got thrown out, but it did have merit. So litigation, I totally look to see something in the future. I always talk about my perfect world, and this is my perfect world. Grazing systems on all pasture ground, all acres covered with some kind of cover crops using no-till and greatly reduced inputs. It's not an either or, guys. We can have all the yields we want. We can have hogs on the land. We can do all these things. We just have to do it in a way that is more sustainable. And it's not hard technology. The change has to come between the ears because the technology is out there, the know-how is out there. It's just a matter of whether we are willing to change and be able to do it. So it's each of our responsibilities, and I think it's actually the responsibility of each of the consumer, the producer, everybody. We have to get more involved. We have to look at how we can change it. And with that, please reach out to me individually, text, email, any way you can, and I'd be glad to visit with any of you about this more if needed.
All right. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
So we had a bunch of questions roll in right here at the end. Go ahead and keep asking questions, folks, if anything else pops up. Chris, there were a couple questions during your presentation, just kind of looking for, I guess the general theme was asking about the correlation between extra nitrogen applied to the land and increases in the stream, and just kind of are those like, I know you talked before about nitrogen purchased in the watershed versus what you've measured in the stream.
So yes, we have a mass balance problem, and so the inputs are substantially larger than the amount of nitrogen that's being removed in the crop, and so it's got to go somewhere. It doesn't go out to the Milky Way. Doesn't all end up in the streams, but we know of that surplus, the difference between the inputs and the outputs, about 30% of it ends up in the streams, and so we really, I mean, we've known this since the 1980s, and farmers are really reluctant to reduce their rates. We know Iowa State has the N rate calculator, and I think 5 states use this, and we know that on average statewide we're well above the recommended rate for using the N rate calculator. So that's
yeah. We've got people in the audience from all over the country, so if you're listening and you're not from an area where you're very familiar with agriculture, or how this works, is that nitrogen is used a lot in agriculture, also in managing people's yards and golf courses and all sorts of things, but it's a component that helps feed the plants, and if there's too much of it applied to the landscape, the plants aren't able to take it up, or if it's applied at the wrong time or in the wrong place, it can wash off the landscape. So that's where it winds up being an issue.
So I want to interject here. It's really a myth that this nitrogen's coming from lawns. there's really not much scientific evidence that nitrogen can get away from turf. And in fact, we've tried turf grasses as cover crops. We've experimented with them. Bluegrass is a cover crop, and one of the reasons we don't use it is because it scavenges nitrogen so well and leaves it unavailable for the corn. And so nobody should think this is coming from turf grass.
Absolutely. Our golf courses or any of that, we've got some research on that too.
That's helpful. Somebody, well, I don't like talking too much about the Des Moines Waterworks lawsuit because it's a little sensitive, but people asked if, someone asked if following that, if there's been any changes on farming practices or drainage that you know of, Chris or Eric. I don't know how much Eric knows about this stuff.
In terms of Des Moines Waterworks, you know, in full disclosure here, I used to work there, and you know, the Iowa Watershed Approach Project had $2.5 million to spend in the North Raccoon watershed on practices. And they finally had to close up shop because they couldn't get any adoption. And so they only spent about $500,000 on 3 projects and on creating a watershed plan. And then the rest of the money was just distributed to other watersheds because they couldn't get any farmers to adopt. And so, no, the lawsuit did not catalyze adoption of practices in that watershed.
Eric, this question came in during your presentation. Somebody was asking if you can talk about the difference or maybe the impact of pastured livestock versus confinement livestock, and or Chris might also have something off on that.
I don't like to get into politics too much of pasture. I mean, I like pastured livestock just because I think you need livestock on the land, you know, and when we have confined type areas, it's a different deal. We do have have to get rid of the waste. But I think the waste, if it's handled correctly, and that's probably the biggest problem, like up in Iowa and some of these places, it's not so much the CAFO or the confined area itself. Now, granted, they have spills, they have problems, but I think it's, and Chris might agree, it's probably more of the land application type stuff. They're applying it to land, they can't hold it, they can't handle it, or the wrong time of year, or it's soils that, cover crop to scavenge it up. That's why I say it can be either or. So, I mean, personally, we've got a grazing systems and we graze all of ours that way, but, and you could have all the livestock on the land and not have to be in confinement, but it's a whole different mindset of people how you do. But if you're going to confine livestock or do anything like that, you just manage it the right way and put it on soils that can handle it with covers and correct soil health practices.
So I agree with that. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with the CAFO from a water quality perspective. The problem we have in Iowa is we have a concentration of animals in certain areas, and we're running out of fields to apply the material, and it's more difficult to handle. Taking it into a confinement, makes it quote unquote hot, at least with hogs, and so we have extreme weather in Iowa. Everybody knows that. The time windows to get this stuff out of the pit and onto the land are not wide. And, the other big thing nobody wants to talk about is our laws here in Iowa, with what we call our master matrix and the manure management plans, allow for an over application of nutrient. And, that's a big problem.
I guess this is kind of a big question, something that I'm sure we would all love the answer to. But with all the data supporting change, what are the current barriers to making those changes?
Wow, I'll go first, Chris, if you want. Everything is set up for it to stay a certain way. I mean, when you have crop subsidies, I can sit and soil health on one end, but then we have ethanol mandates on the other end. You know, so the subsidies allow you to grow corn when it doesn't need to be grown. You know, it makes for a system that, to me, if it's still in place, it can never be fixed. I mean, so it's a huge system. We know these technologies work. We know there's ways to do this, but there is so much subsidization, big ag, everything, and we could talk about this for hours, and I can probably make a lot of people mad real quick. But the system is rigged to not change because of the way it's set up. Just because it's and it's also a mindset. You know, farmers have done things a certain way. They've been told by universities the soil tests need to be certain ways, and you know, as Chris was saying, we put this many units of nitrogen on no matter what. There's a whole mindset, and we've lost the ability of a lot of agronomic skills that we had 40, 50, 60 years ago. So it's just a problem it's a pretty big problem, and I think can be handled by taking subsidies away.
So the corn soybean system, as it's currently constructed, cannot exist without a license to discharge nutrients to the stream network. If we were to tomorrow say, you know, assign a limit to the amount of nitrogen coming out of tiles, I mean, the whole thing would collapse. And so Eric says over and over again, well, it's cheaper to keep these pollutants on the landscape than it is to treat for them downstream. Well, it's not cheaper for the farmer.
He's right.
You know, and that's the issue. And so you have, you know, the politics of it is, you know, agriculture has been able to keep, you know, the system unregulated for the most part, at least within the context of water quality, you know, going back decades. And so Des Moines has been removing nitrate from its water since 1992. Well, you know, that's what, almost 30 years ago now. And so, you know, I think it's just correct to say that there's no use avoiding saying it. It's the politics of it is not favorable for clean water.
Yeah. It's definitely a not, the answer is it's simple, or it's easy to understand, but it's not easy to do when there's so many different factors, you know, economically and socially and personally going into it. So definitely a big topic.
It really does take consumer input. You know, we've seen changes in EPA. I won't get into the details, but there's a thing called PFAS and PFOA, which is a new thing that's regulated. It's Teflon. And we've seen EPA now have regulations that have been pushed by the consumer, you know, and the consumer can have a tremendous effort on what they push back and say enough. So it can be changed if people get involved and change it.
Yeah. I think that's a positive note to end on. It's 1:02 here in my time zone anyways. So if people are taking their lunch break off to join us, thank you. And I want to be respectful to everyone's time in the audience. Huge thanks to Chris and Eric, you know, for joining us today and offering your expertise and taking the time to get this all set up. I really appreciate it. And judging by all of our attendees and all the questions and comments that were coming in, I know the audience did as well. So thanks you guys.
You're welcome. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. And if people want to reach out to me personally for any of these questions, I'd be glad to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just go to our website.
Go to Chris's website. All right. We've got a bunch of questions we didn't get a chance to get to, so you guys can get in touch with these two if you guys need to follow up with those. You'll be getting a follow-up email with a link to the recording of this webinar when it's available. So with that, I'm going to sign off and hope everyone has a great day. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks for having me back.